His boots were dirty, but his kiss was pure fire. Welcome to the world of country romance. Comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The air in the valley hung thick and sweet with the smell of freshly cut hay and the impending promise of a humid summer. A familiar perfume that had scented every one of Grace's 19 years. It was the scent of home, of security, of a life laid out as neatly as the rows of corn in her father's fields. From the porch swing of their sturdy two-story farmhouse, she could see the entire world she had ever known. The rolling hills that cupped the town of Harmony Creek like a gentle hand, the distant steeple of the community church, and the winding dirt road that eventually, miles away, surrendered to paved highway. It was a beautiful cage gilded with love and familial duty, and there were days she felt its bars pressing in on her, a soft, inexorable weight upon her chest. Her family, a tight-knit constellation of loving and protective souls, orbited around her with a gravitational pull that was both a comfort and a suffocation. Her mother still fussed over her as if she were a child. Her father's pride in her was a heavy mantle to wear, and her older brother, Daniel, now a deputy sheriff, saw it as his solemn duty to vet every aspect of her life for potential threats, which to him included anything that originated beyond the county line. They loved her. She knew that with a certainty that was as deep and unshakable as the oak tree in their yard, but they could not comprehend the restless fire that burned within her, a yearning for a horizon she couldn't see from the porch swing. The arrival of the Sundance Rodeo was announced not by a formal proclamation, but by a rumble of diesel engines and a caravan of trucks and trailers that snaked through the town's single main street, stirring up dust and a level of excitement Harmony Creek hadn't felt since the previous year's county fair. For 2 weeks, the rodeo would transform the sleepy fairgrounds into a vibrant, chaotic world of flashing lights, thunderous applause, and the raw, untamed energy of man against beast. To her family, it was a fine and wholesome diversion, a chance to eat funnel cake and watch the spectacle under the stars. For Grace, however, the convoy of strangers felt like a message from another universe, a tangible piece of the vast, unknown world that she hungered for. The very idea of their nomadic existence, of waking up in a different town every few weeks with nothing but the road ahead and behind, was an intoxicating fantasy that stood in stark contrast to her own rooted, predictable life. She watched them set up from a distance, a small city of canvas and steel rising from the earth, and felt a pull so powerful it was almost a physical ache, a call to a life lived on its own terms, free from the gentle but firm expectations that had shaped her own. Opening night was a riot of sensory overload, the air electric with anticipation and buzzing with the murmur of the entire town gathered in the stands. The sharp, clean scent of sawdust mingled with the rich, greasy aroma of fried onions and the earthy perfume of livestock. Grace sat wedged between her mother and a beaming Daniel, feeling the familiar constraints of her family's presence, even in the midst of the crowd. She wore her favorite washed-out, high-waisted jeans that hugged her petite frame, paired with a soft flannel button-down, its top buttons undone to offer a tantalizing glimpse of her robust cleavage. A small act of defiance her mother had thankfully not noticed in the rush to leave the house. Her golden blonde curls were a riotous halo around her face, catching the glare of the floodlights. As the show began, 2 cowboys, all swagger and gleaming belt buckles, burst into the arena. They were the showmen, their confidence radiating as they played to the crowd with charming winks and flashy rope tricks. They were handsome, polished, and they commanded the audience's adoration with an easy, practiced grace. Her family cheered along with everyone else, but Grace's attention was fragmented, her gaze drifting, searching. And then he appeared. He entered the arena, not with a bang, but with a quiet intensity that seemed to suck the air out of her lungs. He was the third cowboy, Tobias, a name she'd later learned from the announcer's gravelly voice. He didn't scan the crowd or flash a pearly white smile. His focus was absolute, a laser beam fixed on the powerful, agitated bull waiting in the chute. There was a brooding stillness about him that was more captivating than all the other cowboys' boisterous energy combined. He moved with an economical, powerful grace, his dark brown hair falling across a brow furrowed in concentration. As he settled onto the bull's back, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, a silent, primal negotiation taking place between man and beast. When the gate flew open, it was not a dance, but a war. He wasn't a performer, he was a survivor. Every muscle in his body was coiled and locked in a desperate 8-second battle for control against 1,000 pounds of raw fury. Grace leaned forward, her hands gripping the wooden bench, her heart pounding in a rhythm that matched the frantic, jarring motions in the arena. She saw past the spectacle to the man, to the grim set of his jaw and the fierce, almost haunted look in his intense brown eyes. When the buzzer sounded and he dismounted with a fluid agility, landing solidly in the dirt, the applause that erupted felt distant and unimportant. He simply retrieved his hat, dusted it off against his thigh, and walked away without a backward glance, his reserved posture a fortress against the roaring approval of the crowd. In that moment, Grace knew her fascination had found its anchor. The seed of a plan began to germinate that night, watered by a restless energy that kept her tossing and turning long after the farmhouse had fallen silent. The rodeo wasn't just a show to be watched from the stands anymore. It was a world she had to get inside. She wasn't a fool. She knew she couldn't just waltz in and announce her intentions. She needed a reason, a purpose that would allow her to exist on the periphery, to observe, and to be near the quiet center of the storm that was Tobias. The next morning, long before the sun had even considered cresting the hills, she slipped out of her bed. Moving with a stealth born of long practice, she dressed in the pre-dawn gloom, pulling on old, worn jeans and a sturdy work shirt. She crept down the stairs, bypassed the creaky fourth step, and slipped out the back door into the cool, misty air. The thrill of her clandestine mission was a potent cocktail of fear and exhilaration that made her feel more alive than she had in months. The fairgrounds were a world transformed from the night before. The garish lights were off, replaced by the soft gray light of dawn, and the roar of the crowd was replaced by the gentle sounds of animals waking, the murmur of voices, and the clatter of work. She found the foreman, a barrel-chested man with a weathered face and deeply skeptical eyes, supervising the unloading of feed sacks. Taking a deep breath, she approached him, her voice steadier than she felt. She explained that she lived nearby, loved being around horses, and was willing to do any work he had for free, just for the chance to be a part of it all. He gave her a long, hard look, his gaze assessing her from her worn boots to her determined expression, no doubt pegging her as another star-struck local girl. She expected a gruff dismissal, but instead he just grunted and gestured with his chin toward a row of stalls. "Those stalls need mucking. Rakes and barrows are over there. Don't get in the way." It wasn't a warm welcome, but it was an acceptance, and it was more than enough. The work was hard, physical, and profoundly dirty. The unfamiliar muscles in her back and arms screamed in protest as she scraped and lifted and hauled. But with every bead of sweat that trickled down her temple, she felt a layer of her old life sloughing away. She was anonymous here, judged not by her family name, but by the diligence of her labor. She felt a deep, satisfying sense of purpose in the simple, honest work, a feeling that was entirely her own, earned and unattached to anyone's expectations. For 2 days, she followed this new routine, sneaking out at dawn and returning home just before her family stirred, smuggling the scent of hay and honest dirt back into her pristine bedroom. She kept her head down and worked, learning the rhythms of the camp, the hierarchy of the crew, and the names of the horses. She saw Tobias from a distance, a solitary figure who seemed to exist in his own orbit. He spoke little to the others, preferring the company of the anomals he cared for with a gentle, practiced hand. He noticed her, she was sure of it. She would catch his gaze for a fleeting second across the dusty expanse of the grounds, a brief, unreadable flicker in those intense brown eyes before he looked away. Then, on the third morning, as she struggled to drag a full sloshing water bucket across the uneven ground, its weight threatening to pull her arms from their sockets, a shadow fell over her. A calloused hand closed over hers on the metal handle, a current of warmth shooting up her arm. She looked up into the face of Tobias. He said nothing, his expression as reserved as ever, but he gently took the bucket from her grasp and carried it the rest of the way to the trough with an effortless strength. He emptied it and turned back, his eyes finally meeting hers directly. For a long, silent moment, he just looked at her, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. It wasn't just a recognition of her struggle, but a validation of her presence, of her hard work. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod before turning and walking away, leaving Grace standing there, her heart hammering against her ribs, the ghost of his touch still tingling on her hand. The silence between them had been more profound than any conversation, a quiet promise of something more, shimmering like a heat haze on the horizon. The single silent gesture at the water trough became a quiet language between them, a foundation built in the space where words had yet to form. That brief electric touch had broken a seal, and in the days that followed, the vast dusty expanse of the rodeo grounds no longer felt like a barrier separating them. The dynamic shifted from one of distant observation to a series of small, deliberate intersections. Tobias would appear with a cold bottle of water, pressing it into her hand without ceremony, as she rested in the sliver of shade behind the stables, his knuckles brushing against hers for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. He once stopped her as she was coiling a rope, his larger, more experienced hands guiding hers, showing her a specific knot that was both stronger and easier to undo. The simple lesson feeling as intimate as a whispered secret. These moments were fleeting, charged with an unspoken energy that left Grace's skin tingling and her thoughts circling back to his reserved presence and the rare, fleeting warmth in his intense brown eyes. The true crossing of the threshold came one evening as the sun bled across the western sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The day's work was done, the crew migrating towards the cook tent, but Grace lingered on the top bench of the empty grandstand, unwilling to return to her own world just yet. The quiet figure that sat down a respectful distance from her was a surprise she had secretly been hoping for. It was Tobias. For a long time, they simply sat in a comfortable silence, watching the last of the light fade until he finally spoke, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the wooden bench. You don't belong here, he said, not as an accusation, but as a simple, profound observation that struck the very core of her. But you don't seem to belong out there either. And with that, the dam of silence broke, not in a flood, but in a steady, cleansing stream that would carry them to a place of their own. That first real conversation led them, as if by some unspoken agreement, away from the prying eyes of the camp to the secluded banks of Harmony Creek, which curled around the edge of the fairgrounds. This bend in the river became their sanctuary, a liminal space that belonged neither to the rodeo nor the town, but solely to them. Under the vast star-dusted canopy of the country night, with the gentle symphony of crickets and the soft gurgle of water as their only audience, they began to unravel the stories of their lives. In this sacred quiet, Grace found her voice, speaking with an unguarded passion about her dreams of seeing mountains and oceans, of experiencing a life that wasn't pre-written by tradition and love and obligation. She confessed her fears of disappointing her family, juxtaposed against the deeper fear of disappointing herself by never trying to live. Tobias, in turn, slowly dismantled the fortress he had built around himself. He spoke of a childhood spent moving from one ranch to another, of a life on the road that had once promised freedom but now felt like a gilded cage on wheels. He described the crushing sameness of the cheering crowds, the hollow victory of the shiny belt buckles, and the profound loneliness of waking up in a town whose name you could barely remember. A stranger to everyone, but most painfully, a stranger to himself. He was a man adrift, searching for an anchor in a world that was constantly in motion. It was in these stolen hours that the levity she had only glimpsed began to surface. He told her a hilarious, self-deprecating story about a time his pants had split mid-ride in front of thousands, and she saw a genuine, breathtaking smile transform his entire face. In return, she relentlessly teased him about his perpetually serious expression, making it her personal mission to coax that smile out again and again, her laughter echoing over the dark water, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that he seemed to drink in like a man dying of thirst. Their idyllic bubble, suspended in the soft glow of moonlight and whispered confessions, was brutally burst on a Tuesday morning that dawned with an unusual and unsettling stillness. The typical morning sounds of the camp, the good-natured yelling, the clanging of metal, the snorting of horses, were replaced by a tense electric hum of panicked whispers. Grace arrived to a scene of controlled chaos. Crew hands were gathered in tight, anxious knots, and the rodeo owner, a formidable man named Marcus Black, was pacing like a caged lion, his face a thunderous mask of fury. The prize stud, the legendary bucking horse known as Midnight, was gone. He hadn't just escaped. The heavy-duty lock on his personal pen had been deliberately broken, the gate left swinging open in a silent, mocking invitation. Midnight was more than just an animal. He was the soul of the Sundance Rodeo, a magnificent beast of black muscle and untamable spirit whose image adorned their posters and trailers. His disappearance was a catastrophic blow, representing not just a massive financial loss, but a violation of the rodeo's very heart. The camp, once a place of gruff but reliable camaraderie, was instantly transformed. The unspoken trust that bound the nomadic community together evaporated under the harsh glare of suspicion. Suddenly, every face was a potential suspect, every shadow held a potential thief, and the tight-knit family of travelers fractured into wary, distrustful individuals, each one eyeing the other and wondering who among them was the traitor. It did not take long for the whispers to find a target. The other two star cowboys, Cody and Bo, Men who thrived in the spotlight and possessed an oily practice charm quickly began to shape the narrative. Grace watched from the periphery, her stomach clenching with a cold dread, as they spoke in low, concerned tones to Marcus and other influential members of the crew. They didn't need to make direct accusations, their genius was in their insinuation. They spoke of Tobias's solitary nature, recasting his quiet professionalism as secretive aloofness. "Never really talks to anyone, you know," Cody would say, shaking his head with feigned disappointment. "Always keeps to himself. A man that quiet, you just never know what he's thinking." Bo would chime in, adding that Tobias had only joined the tour 6 months ago, making him an outsider, not one of the family who had been with Marcus for years. They expertly used his stoicism, the very quality that Grace found so compelling, as a weapon against him, painting a portrait of a brooding, untrustworthy loner who existed outside their code of conduct. The poison of their words spread quickly through the anxious camp, finding fertile ground in the fear and paranoia that now reigned. This rising tide of suspicion within the rodeo was mirrored by a growing storm at home. Grace's carefully constructed double life was beginning to fray at the edges. Her brother Daniel, his deputy's eyes trained to see things others missed, cornered her in the kitchen one afternoon. His arms crossed over his chest, his expression a mixture of brotherly concern and professional scrutiny. He noted her constant exhaustion, the calluses forming on her hands, and the faint but persistent smell of horse and hay that clung to her clothes. He had heard the news in town about the stolen horse, and he put the pieces together with an unnerving accuracy. "You've been spending all your time out there, haven't you?" he demanded, his voice low but firm. "Grace, these are not our kind of people. They drift in and they drift out, and they often bring trouble with them." She tried to deny it, to deflect with a vague answer, but he pressed on, his voice softening slightly, but losing none of its intensity. "Listen to me. When something goes wrong in a closed group like that, when a crime is committed, they look for someone to blame. And an outsider, someone who doesn't quite fit in, is always the easiest target. Stay away from there, please, before you get hurt or worse, caught up in something you can't get out of." His words were a chilling prophecy that echoed the whispers she'd already heard. Grace was now trapped in an impossible position, her heart pulling her towards the man she was falling for, while her brother's warning and the insidious rumors swirling around the camp signaled a looming danger that threatened to consume Tobias and her fragile newfound happiness along with him. The sanctuary by the river felt 1,000,000 miles away, and the storm she knew was about to break. The fragile peace of the morning was shattered by a shout, followed by the convergence of the entire camp toward the now infamous empty pen. Cody, one of the 2-star cowboys, stood there holding a small distinctive object up for all to see, his face a mask of feigned reluctance and grim duty. It was a specialized leather working tool, a custom-edged creaser that Grace recognized instantly from the meticulously organized kit Tobias kept beside his saddle rack. She had watched him use it just days before, his hands working with a practiced, loving precision to repair a frayed strap. To see it now, presented as a piece of damning evidence found near the broken lock, sent a wave of icy dread through her. The foreman confirmed its uniqueness. It was Tobias's without a doubt. The whispers that had been swirling for days now coalesced into a single, ugly certainty in the court of camp opinion. Marcus Black, his face dark with the fury of a betrayed patriarch, strode through the parting crowd and confronted Tobias, who had been drawn out by the commotion. The accusation was not a question but a verdict, delivered in a voice that was low and shaken with rage. "I took you in, I gave you a place, and this is how you repay me?" Tobias stood motionless, the color draining from his face as he absorbed the full weight of the scene. His denial was not the loud, blustering defense of a guilty man, but a quiet, firm statement that was almost lost in the hostile silence. "It wasn't me, Marcus." His words were simple, true, and utterly useless against the tide of manufactured evidence and skillfully nurtured suspicion. He was a man whose entire character was built on quiet action rather than empty words, and in this moment, his own nature was the final nail in his coffin. Grace watched, trapped behind a wall of hostile onlookers, her heart fracturing with each passing second of the monstrous injustice unfolding before her. In the aftermath of the accusation, a suffocating pall fell over the fairgrounds. Tobias was a ghost in his own life, confined to his trailer by order of Marcus, pending the official involvement of the town sheriff. He was isolated, untouchable, a pariah convicted without a trial. Grace felt a desperate, clawing need to reach him, to tell him she believed him. But the invisible walls of the camp's judgment were as real and impenetrable as steel. She retreated to their sanctuary by the river, the one place that still felt pure, but the peaceful gurgle of the water now sounded like a mocking whisper. Sinking to the ground, she wrapped her arms around her knees, fighting back the hot tears of frustration and helplessness. Crying, however, would do nothing. It wouldn't clear his name or expose the lie that had poisoned this place. She forced herself to breathe, to push past the emotional agony and into the cold, clear realm of logic. Her mind, no longer clouded by the romantic haze of their secret meetings, began to work with a sharp, desperate clarity. She replayed the last few days, sifting through every seemingly insignificant detail she had observed during her long hours of work. The pieces began to connect, not randomly, but with the chilling precision of a well-laid plan. She recalled with sudden vividness the hushed, tense conversation she'd seen between Cody and Bo near the stables the night Midnight vanished. She had dismissed it then as a typical disagreement, but now she remembered Bo's sharp, panicked gestures and Cody's placating yet firm responses. Then another piece clicked into place, a snippet of gossip she'd overheard from a grizzled old crew hand about Bo's increasingly reckless gambling and the substantial debts he owed to dangerous people. That provided the motive, the desperate pressure that could drive a man to extremes. Suddenly, the entire conspiracy illuminated in her mind with the blinding flash of a lightning strike. They weren't trying to sell the horse. That would be too complicated and risky. This was about power. This was an execution of a rival. They would frame Tobias, the quiet, talented cowboy who was steadily stealing their thunder. And then, after a few days of panic, they would miraculously find Midnight, emerging as the heroes of the hour, securing their positions and their income, and eliminating their competition in one masterful stroke. The final piece was a faint memory of seeing them walking away from the dilapidated, long-abandoned barn at the far edge of the fairgrounds, a place everyone else ignored. It was the perfect hiding spot. Armed with a theory that felt terrifyingly plausible, Grace knew she was powerless to prove it alone. She was just a local girl with a crush in the eyes of everyone at the rodeo, and her word would mean nothing against the two established stars. There was only one person who might listen, one person who had the authority to act, even if he was the last person she wanted to admit the depth of her involvement to. She drove home, her hands gripping the steering wheel, and found her brother Daniel in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee before his shift. When she laid out her story, his initial reaction was exactly what she had dreaded. A weary sigh, a shake of the head, and the unmistakable look of a brother about to deliver an "I told you so." He reminded her of the hard evidence, of the tool found at the scene, of the dozen witnesses who could attest to Tobias's standoffish nature. He repeated his warnings about getting involved with drifters and their messes, but this was a different Grace than the little sister he was used to protecting. She didn't plead or cry. She stood her ground, her hazel eyes flashing with a fire he had never seen before, and she presented her case not as a lovesick girl's fantasy, but as a logical, reasoned argument. She laid out the timeline, the clear motive of professional jealousy, compounded by Bo's gambling debts, and the perfect opportunity presented by the abandoned barn. "I'm not asking you to believe me because I like him," she stated, her voice even and strong. "I'm asking you to be a cop. The official story is too neat, too convenient. Don't you at least think a competing theory is worth 30 minutes of your time before an innocent man's life is ruined?" The shift in her demeanor, from dreamy girl to determined woman, caught him off guard. He saw the unshakable conviction in her eyes, and the cold logic of her argument, and the cop in him, the part that hated loose ends and overly simple solutions, was finally piqued. With a long, resigned sigh, he put down his coffee cup. "All right, Grace, 30 minutes, but if we find nothing, you drop this and you stay away from that place for good." The old barn loomed at the edge of the property, its paint peeling and its roof sagging, a forgotten relic of a bygone era. The air inside was thick with the dust of decades and the smell of decay. As they stepped from the bright sunlight into the dim, shadowy interior, Daniel's skepticism was palpable. "Grace, there's nothing here," he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. They began a slow, methodical search, their footsteps muffled by the layer of old, rotting hay on the floor. It seemed hopeless. Stall after stall was empty, filled with nothing but cobwebs and forgotten debris. Daniel was about to call it quits when Grace held up a hand, her body freezing. "Listen," she whispered. At first there was nothing but the sound of their own breathing. Then she heard it again, a faint muffled snort, followed by the soft stomp of a hoof on packed earth, a sound that did not belong in this dead place. She pointed towards a large collapsed pile of old tarps and rotting timber in the far corner. It looked like a pile of junk, but as they drew closer, they could see the pile was not random. It was deliberately placed to conceal a reinforced stall door at the very back of the barn. With his heart now pounding with a mix of adrenaline and disbelief, Daniel helped her pull the debris away. He slid the heavy bolt, and as the door creaked open, they were met with the sight of a magnificent, massive black horse who blinked at the sudden intrusion of light. It was midnight, alive and perfectly unharmed. A wave of triumphant relief washed over Grace so powerful it nearly buckled her knees. As Daniel was reaching for his radio to call it in, two figures appeared in the wide barn doorway, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun. It was Cody and Bo, their faces breaking into triumphant smiles as they saw the horse, clearly arriving to enact the final heroic scene of their drama. Their smiles instantly vanished, replaced by masks of pure, unadulterated shock as they saw not just Grace, but the uniformed figure of Deputy Sheriff Daniel McCormick standing beside her. The game was over. Daniel took control, his voice dropping into a calm, authoritative tone that tolerated no argument. He laid out Grace's theory, which was no longer a theory but an undeniable fact standing right in front of them. Cody, the charmer, tried to bluster his way out of it, but Bo, the desperate gambler, visibly crumbled under the weight of Daniel's unwavering stare. It took less than 5 minutes for his story to fall apart, and with it, the whole despicable, self-serving conspiracy came tumbling out into the dusty, silent air of the old barn. The confession of Cody and Bo sent a shockwave through the Sundance Rodeo, a seismic event that shattered the camp's fragile social structure far more completely than the initial accusation had. The news spread not as a whispers, but as a wildfire burning through the tents and trailers, leaving a trail of stunned silence and shame in its wake. The crew, who had so quickly and eagerly condemned Tobias, now stood in awkward, silent groups, unable to meet his gaze. There was no grand apology, no formal exoneration from Marcus Black, who was too busy dealing with the legal and logistical nightmare of firing his two headlining acts. But vindication came in a far more potent form. It came in the quiet, respectful nods that now followed Tobias wherever he went, in the way the crew members would go out of their way to offer him a coffee or a helping hand, their gestures heavy with an unspoken atonement. For Tobias, however, their collective guilt was nothing more than background noise. His entire world had narrowed to the woman who had walked through fire for him. He found her by the stables, methodically brushing down a gentle mare, her movements calm and steady as if she hadn't just single-handedly dismantled a criminal conspiracy. He stood there for a long moment, simply watching her, overwhelmed by a torrent of emotions too powerful and too new to name. Gratitude was too small a word. It was a profound, soul-shaking awe that left him breathless. This petite woman with the golden curls and the fierce, intelligent eyes had seen the truth of him when no one else had. And she had possessed the courage not only to believe in him, but to fight for him with a tenacity that humbled him to his core. When she finally looked up and saw him, a soft smile touching her lips, he felt something inside him, a wall he hadn't even been fully aware of, crumble into dust. He walked toward her, and without a word, he gently took the brush from her hand, set it aside, and then cupped her face in his calloused palms, his touch infinitely tender. He didn't kiss her. He simply held her, his intense brown eyes searching hers, conveying a depth of feeling that no words could ever capture. "You saved me, Grace," he finally whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "in more ways than you'll ever know." The ripple effects of that afternoon in the abandoned barn extended far beyond the fairgrounds, reaching the quiet sanctuary of the farmhouse. When Daniel returned home that evening, he recounted the entire story to their parents, not as a tale of his sister's reckless adventure, but as a testament to her sharp mind and unwavering character. He spoke with a newfound respect in his voice, describing how Grace had pieced together the clues, how she had formulated a logical theory, and how she had faced him down with the confidence of a seasoned detective. For the first time, her family saw her not as a little girl they needed to shield from the world, but as the formidable young woman she had become. The subtle shift was palpable. Her mother's fussing was replaced by quiet, proud glances. Her father, a man of few words, put his arm around her shoulders that night on the porch swing, the familiar setting for a profoundly new dynamic. "Your mother and I," he began, his voice raspy with emotion, "we just wanted to keep you safe. We never wanted to hold you back. Seeing you, hearing what you did, we know you can handle yourself. Whatever you choose to do, wherever you choose to go, we're proud of you. Just know that." It was the greatest gift he could have ever given her, not just his blessing, but his trust. The loving cage she had felt trapped in for so long had not been broken, but had simply dissolved, its bars revealed to be nothing more than the shadows of their loving fears. She had not needed to run away to find her independence. She had forged it right here at home, in the crucible of her own conviction. The restless fire within her hadn't been extinguished, it had simply found its purpose, burning now not with a desperate yearning for escape, but with the steady, confident flame of self-knowledge. The final day of the rodeo was a study in organized chaos, the air thick with the scent of diesel fumes and the bittersweet feeling of departure. The vibrant temporary city was being dismantled piece by piece, packed away into trucks and trailers, ready to chase the horizon to the next town. Grace stood by the fence watching the flurry of activity, a strange mixture of melancholy and peace settling over her. Just a week ago, this scene would have represented an agonizing choice, the embodiment of the free-spirited life she craved pulling away from the rooted existence she was bound to. Now it was just a spectacle. The magic had faded, replaced by the stark reality of what that life truly entailed, the loneliness, the instability, the potential for the kind of casual cruelty she had witnessed firsthand. Her infatuation with the idea of the rodeo had been supplanted by her love for the man, and she was beginning to understand that the two were not the same thing. The ordeal had irrevocably jolted Tobias from the stupor that had defined his existence for years. Being falsely accused, seeing his freedom and reputation hang by a thread, and then being saved by Grace's fierce loyalty had been a violent, clarifying awakening. He finally understood that the endless loop he felt trapped in wasn't the road itself, but his own passive journey through it. He had been a passenger in his own life, watching the world go by from behind a wall of detached resignation. Grace had shown him what it meant to be an active participant, to fight for something, to connect with a person and a place so deeply that it becomes a part of you. The thought of getting back on that carousel, of packing up and moving on to the next indistinguishable town, now felt not just lonely, but utterly unbearable, a betrayal of the profound connection he had finally found. He found her there, by the fence separating the bustling, temporary world of the Sundance Rodeo from the quiet, permanent fields of Harmony Creek. He didn't approach her with the hesitant uncertainty of their first encounters, but with the quiet confidence of a man who knows exactly what he wants. He stood beside her, his gaze not on the departing trucks, but on the rolling green hills that stretched out before them. I used to think freedom was about having no ties, about being able to leave any time you wanted, he began, his voice steady and clear above the din of the departing camp. But these last 2 weeks, you've shown me what real freedom is. It's about having something worth staying for. He turned to face her, his intense brown eyes soft and filled with a hope she had never seen in them before. I'm not going with them, Grace. I'm done running. For years, I've been saving my winnings, telling myself it was for a rainy day, but I never knew what I was really saving for, until now. He reached out and took her hands, his touch sending a familiar jolt of warmth through her. There's a small horse farm for sale just a few miles past the ridge over there. It's not much, just a little house and a decent barn, but it's on solid ground. I'm leaving the rodeo and I'm going to buy it. He paused, his heart in his throat, his gaze unwavering. I don't want to offer you a life on the road, Grace. I want to offer you a life we can build right here. I want to wake up in the same place every morning, as long as it's with you. Tears of pure, unadulterated joy welled in Grace's hazel eyes, blurring the image of the man standing before her, a man who had seen her, truly seen her, and was now offering her not a fleeting adventure, but a shared horizon. The grand romantic fantasies she had once projected onto the rodeo paled in comparison to the profound, steady reality of this incredible man's love. She had yearned for independence and a life less ordinary, and in a beautiful, unexpected twist of fate, she had found it all in the heart of the one place she had been so desperate to leave. Her answer was not just a word, but a lifetime of promise. Yes, she breathed, her voice filled with all the certainty in the world. As the last of the Sundance Rodeo trucks rumbled down the dirt road, kicking up a cloud of dust that shimmered in the afternoon sun, they sealed their future not with a dramatic ride into the sunset, but with a deep, lingering kiss, a quiet beginning planted firmly in the rich, familiar soil of home, of